So we're in Psalm 78 today, and it's massive, like 72 verses, massive. So I'm not going to be able to read you all of it. What I'm going to do is jump in and out of it and just give you, very simply, remember we're not studying the Psalms so much as praying them. I'm going to walk you through how, as I read this, I find myself praying. The overarching thing about Psalm 78 is it's really, I guess it's a warning or a challenge for every generation to ponder the generation that's gone before it and to learn lessons. So it's the kind of psalm that as a parent, it makes you uncomfortable because it makes you think, what am I handing on to my kids? It gets you to consider what your parents handed on to you. It could be awkward, but also it gets to see us within this bigger picture of a spiritual family and how we're learning from the previous generations and what we're handing on to the future generations as followers of Jesus. So it gives us quite a lot to pray about. And at times it's quite an uncomfortable psalm. It begins verse 1, "Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth." Asaph, the guy who wrote this, is really trying to get the attention of the listeners because he has some important things for them to consider. Jump to verse 4, he then says this, "We will not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done." This is really where the first kind of call to prayer, for me anyway, kind of comes through. This call to pray for the future generations to be immersed in the story and the character of God, that they would, they would know God and the greatness of his deeds, his power and his wonders. They would have in their heads like a sense of the story that they're in and the character of the God that they're following. So I find myself drawn to pray for the young people receiving the baton from me, spiritually speaking, that's what they would get. Then Asaph jumps into his sort of first kind of reflections on the previous generation, and he ends in verse 8 with this: "They should not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose heart was not steadfast, whose spirit was not faithful to God." There's a lot we can do with this, and this is not about having a go at the previous generation, but what it is an invitation to do is prayerfully reflect, what can we learn both from the good and the mistakes of the previous generations, both in terms of our families, but also in terms of church. What wonderful things has the church done in history, but what pretty hideous things has the church done in history, and how can we learn? So I find myself praying for insight and wisdom and the courage to address that stuff and not be like that stuff. So it's a pretty deep stuff to be praying about. Verse 11, "They forgot his works and the wonders that he had shown them." What you have is Asaph then says, well, here's kind of my diagnosis of what went on. They forgot. Why did the previous generation go wrong spiritually? They forgot. And it's that invitation to not forget, to be the kind of people who, when we pray, we take a bit of time to sit in who God is and remember. A prayer life that kind of pulls, remember when he did that? Remember when he did that? It invites us to not just reel off a list of requests, but to stop and ponder the goodness of God and kind of immerse ourselves in it. Verse 32, "In spite of all this, they sinned. Despite his wonders, they did not believe." Up to that point, he's kind of taught us about the ebb and the flow of the people of God and God. And then he kind of, this verse 32 is his, again, a diagnosis. Despite what God did, they just didn't trust him or follow him. This is a moment, again, when I find myself praying that prayer that the father of the child prays or says to Jesus. He says, "I believe, help my unbelief." I don't want to be someone who, despite the wonders of God, I kind of don't believe. So verse 32 invites us into a prayer for help me believe. Now there's loads, but there's just one more thing I want to give you and then leave you to read it and pray yourself. But verses 36 to 38, "But they flattered him with their mouths. They lied to him with their tongues. Their heart was not steadfast toward him. They were not faithful to his covenant." I find myself reading that and going, Lord, I want a life where what my mouth says and what my body, if you like, does matches. I want to declare that you are Lord with my lips, and I want my life to declare it. I want a life of integrity. So there's a whole host of things to get praying for. I hope those are helpful kind of prompters. Have a read, have a pray, and I hope you find this a helpful psalm to get into. God bless.